I'm afraid for some people this class is going to be a review. Chava and Dvorah. Oh, Chana Ramita is on. Hi. Good morning. It's the middle of the night.
Good morning, Rabbi Majeski.
Good morning. Hi, Leora. Okay. So this class is on Moshiach of Geula. So we want to discuss the holiday of Lag Baomer in the light of Moshiach of Geula, how it all fits in. So let me start with this. I don't know if we have enough, but we can pass this around. Thank you. So there's two reasons why we celebrate Lag BaOmer, which is going to be Friday, the 33rd day of the Omer. One reason is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, and that is that when we had the incident with Rabbi Akiva's students, that he had 24,000 students, and unfortunately, a plague broke out, and they all died. It was considered a terrible tragedy. It was a national tragedy because these were, first of all, the numbers, 24,000, and these weren't ordinary people. They were all students of Rabbi Akiva, who was the greatest Torah scholar of that time. So it touched everybody. And not only in that generation, but it became a day and a time of mourning for all future generations. And that's why we now have this halacha that we follow, that during the 6 weeks of the Omer, from Pesach to Shavuos, we don't have weddings. There are different customs, which days, but in general, these are days of mourning, and you don't have weddings, and you don't take haircuts and other things that we don't do in order to demonstrate that we're mourning these 24,000 students that died. So it was a plague, and unfortunately, it was very similar to, unfortunately, what just happened here with COVID, and it's still happening in some places. But there was one day, like Baomer, there are different opinions. According to some opinions, on that day, it stopped. Some opinions say it stopped only that day, it continued after. But definitely that day, like Baomer, is the day that it stopped, and that's why we rejoice and we thank Hashem. One of the things, the way what we practice on this day is it's a time to celebrate with children. And you'll see here in Crown Heights, they have these rallies for children. Children go out into the parks. What's the reason for that? Why do they go to the park? And there's also another interesting custom. Children play with bow and arrows on this day. What's that all about? And why children? So the answer is like this. Let me just give a little bit of the history. I put down on the table these two booklets. One is about Rabbi Akiva, and one is about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. I don't see it, but it must be somewhere here. You'll find it. Oh, this is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So he lived in the times of the Romans. This was after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And there were three prominent people having a discussion. One of them, his name was Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim, and he spoke very highly, complimented the Romans, how wonderful they are. They're building bridges, and they're building roads, and they're building bathhouses for the people. They really care. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was standing there, and he knew what the Romans did. And unfortunately, they were sadistic people. They killed, they murdered, and they beat people. So he said, you can take it, Jim. He said, this one's Rabbi Akiva, this one's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You can actually put it on the table, the other girls take it too. And he said that they don't really do anything because they care. They're doing it for their own. This is to glorify their own name. That's why they're doing it. The third person who was sitting there, which was also somebody prominent, he was quiet. He didn't want to praise the Romans, but he also didn't want to say anything against them. Who knows what could happen? Sure enough, somebody went and informed people in the government of this conversation. So the man who praised the Romans, they gave him a certain promotion, they gave him a high position. The man who was quiet and didn't praise the Romans, they gave him a certain punishment. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who spoke out against them, he was sentenced to death. There was no trial, but they said they're going to capture him and kill him, execute him. And when he heard that, he ran away to hide. And he hid for 12 years together with his son. His son's name was Rabbi Lazar. And they hid in a cave. Nobody knew where they were, not even his own family. So they shouldn't be able to force anybody to reveal where they're hiding. And how did they survive? There was a carob tree of carobs that grew right near the cave. And there was a little spring of water there. So that's how they were able to wash themselves. That's how they were able to have some water to drink. And that's how they survived for 12 years. After the 12 years were over, Eliyahu Navi came to them and he said, I'm here to inform you that the emperor died. And the rule in Rome was when the emperor dies and all the decrees, the people that have to be sentenced to death, it all becomes canceled. So therefore, you no longer have to worry, you can come back. They left the cave, but you can imagine for 12 consecutive years, they didn't see the world. All they saw was themselves learning Torah day and night. They were immersed in spirituality in an unreal way. So when they came out and they saw people doing mundane things, someone plowing a field, it was upsetting. Like, how are people wasting their time on such nonsense? They couldn't relate to it. And as they looked at the field and the plow, it said that it went up in flames because they were so upset that they were doing this. They looked at someone else doing something, that went up in flames. A third thing went up in flames. And then they heard a heavenly voice that came out and said, the two of you go back to your cave before you destroy my entire world. Hashem doesn't want a world in a cave. He wants a world like the world we have, where there's a field and we do work. And therefore, you guys are not ready to handle this, go back to your cave. So they went back to the cave and they were there for another year. And that year was sort of a year of a transition, being able to readjust to the very physical world. And it wasn't so simple because when they came out of the cave, it still wasn't over. The son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who obviously wasn't as great as his father, had the same problem. Wherever he looked, it went up in flames. But this time, the father, he looked at the same place, and whatever was destroyed by him, he healed it. And eventually, they was able to adjust and acclimate themselves to the regular situation. So because they were not living in a normal house, they were out in the field, hiding in a cave. That's why there's a custom to go out in the field. And why is there a custom to play with bow and arrows? So the Gemara says that we find the story in Chumash that there was a flood. And then Hashem said, I make an oath that I'll never bring a flood in this world again. But what's going to be the sign of this oath? It's going to be a rainbow. The rainbow means that if not for the oath, the world is again in a state that it could be destroyed. But because I made an oath, I won't do it. So when you see a rainbow, that's really what it means. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was such a great tzaddik, and he brought so much merit to his whole generation that during his lifetime, there was never a situation where the rainbow came out after a rain. Why? Because his generation was so meritorious that they did not need the rainbow to show, because they never were at a place where they would have been, chas v'shalom, deserving such a punishment as a flood. So to commemorate that, the children also play with a bow and arrow. Actually, in Hebrew, it's the same word. Keshes is a rainbow. And keshes is the word for a bow and arrow. But let's understand a little bit deeper what happened on that day and why is it so relevant to Moshiach and Geula. So the answer is, I gave out the sheet which shows you the following, that one of the things we always say about Chassidus is that when the hidden secrets of Torah come out in the open and they're publicized, that hastens Mashiach's coming. And in the beginning of the year, we had a class on this explaining how this happens. So really, it didn't start with the Baal Shem Tov. It didn't start with Chassidus. The first one and the first stage of the hidden secrets of Torah being able to be revealed in this world was Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. He taught the Zohar. And the Zohar, that's the source of all the teachings of Kabbalah, of mysticism. It's a small little book, but that's the source. And he's the one who wrote it. And in his generation, he was the one who sort of was the first person to bring these deep hidden secrets out into the open. After him, he lived 1800 years ago. That's what I wrote that on the sheet. After him, the one who sort of followed that was the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. He lived approximately 400 years ago, a little bit over 400 years ago. And he's the one that began to not just teach Kabbalah, but began to publicize Kabbalah. He actually made yeshivas for Kabbalah. And he said that the times have changed, and we learned about it in class, that now the time has come that these teachings, which were always hidden, and they were only allowed to be studied by a few select people, now the time has come that these secrets of Torah have to be revealed. It's actually a mitzvah to publicize it as much as possible. Then another 200 years passed until the Baal Shem Tov, but in between, there were 3 generations of great mystics, and they all revealed Kabbalah from the times of the Arizal. On that sheet, you have one who was called Rabbi Eliyahu Baal Shem, then he had a student who was called Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem, then he had a student which was called Rabbi Adam Baal Shem. The test on to the Baal Shem Tov who began to spread Chassidus. Again, I put this on the table. If anyone wants to know a little bit more about these 3 people who are called Baal Shem, the word Baal Shem, by the way, means master of the name. In other words, these are great tzaddikim, and they had tremendous and vast knowledge of Kabbalah, and they performed tremendous miracles, saved people's lives that needed brachas, because they were able to do things that were above nature. And that's what we mean by the words master of the name, that they had a connection to Hashem's name, which is above the laws of nature. And through that, they were able to perform these miracles and help people, each one in their own way. So we know the story with the Baal Shem Tov, that it said the Baal Shem Tov once was in the presence of the soul of Moshiach, and he asked him, when will you come? And his answer was, when your well springs will be spread out, when the teachings of Chassidus will be spread out. So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai had something similar. In the book of the Zohar, it says that Eliyahu Hanavi said to him, there's going to come a time where these teachings are going to be publicized in the world like never before. Even children, whether it means children physically or children figuratively, children in knowledge, will have the knowledge of what you write in your book of Zohar, and therefore you'll realize that publicizing your book is something which brings Mashiach. So first of all, our generation is the generation where we can say there was never been a time in history where the teachings of this book and the teachings of Kabbalah, the hidden secrets of Torah, were so much out there like it is today. You can walk into any bookstore and you can buy a book on the teachings of the hidden secrets of Torah, whether it's Tanya or it's other books, and you can buy it in Hebrew, you can buy it in English, you can buy it in French, you can buy it in Spanish, you can buy it in Russian, which means now it's accessible in a way like it was never ever accessible. And that is what he writes, is what's going to be when Mashiach comes. And what's the connection? What's the connection that learning these things brings Mashiach? So we said this many times, that the essence of Mashiach is not just that physically we'll be happier. Of course, that's going to be the result. There won't be any illness, and there won't be any tears, there won't be any hate, there won't be any competition, there won't be any fighting. All these things are the result, they're the symptoms. But the real change is going to be that Hashem's presence is going to be revealed in the world. Hashem, who's here now, but he's hidden, when Mashiach comes, his presence will be revealed. So when you study the hidden secrets of Torah, you're studying about the greatness of Hashem. It's also revealing Hashem's presence, but not revealing it in a way that we can feel it physically or see it visually. It's revealed in a way that we can understand it intellectually, that we can understand it in our heads. But this is the sort of preparation and orientation, that before Hashem's presence could be revealed in the world in a way that we can actually see it, it'll first be revealed in a way that through the Torah, Hashem's presence, which is always hidden, will be revealed. So therefore, the fact that the Rabbi Shua Yochai began to reveal these secrets of Torah was the beginning of a new era, which is that the hidden aspects of godliness are starting to be revealed, except it's a gradual process. So he did this 1800 years ago, then came along the Arizal, then came along the Baal Shem, then the Baal Shem Tov, and so on and so forth. So the fact that today we're at the threshold, and any moment we'll have Mashiach revealed to us, it's all the result of the fact that these hidden secrets of Torah began to be revealed in the world. That'll ultimately lead that Hashem himself will be revealed in the world. That'll bring Hashem's presence to be revealed in a way like we've never had before. Now, I want to explain another thing. You'll see that the way we celebrate this day is going to be through simcha, rejoicing. In fact, all over the world, especially in Miron, where the Rabbi Shimon Yochai is buried, that's near Tzfat, they're dancing and singing literally 24 hours, all night long and all day. And in many communities, they have till late hours of the night dancing and singing with music. So why is it? After all, this is the day that a great rabbi passed away. The answer is, he himself made that request, that the day that he passed away should be celebrated like a yontif, like a wedding. And therefore, we're fulfilling his wish. But still, how can we explain it? How does it make sense? In fact, it's so important that there's a story which the Arizal writes, it's in the Arizal's writings, that there was a student whose name was Rabbi Avraham Halevi. He was a student of the Arizal. And he traveled with the Arizal to the city of Miron to be at the gravesite of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai on the day of Lag Baomer. And something happened. Unfortunately, a tragedy happened. And the Arizal told him why it happened. Of course, these are great tzaddikim, so things that happen to them are different than what happens to ordinary people. But he told him what happened was as follows. He had a custom that every single day he would say a certain prayer, which all of us say the prayer only once a year. And he would say it every day. What prayer am I talking about? In the Siddur, there's a prayer that we say on Tisha B'Av, the day that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. We say a prayer, it's called Nachem. And by the way, even Tisha B'Av, we don't say it 3 times, we say it only once, only Mincha time. And that prayer is asking Hashem to console us, to comfort us because of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And this person, he so much felt the pain and the suffering of Golus, and so much felt the pain of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash that he would say this prayer every single day. So obviously he did it because he was such a righteous person. And then there's a deeper reason why he was different than everybody else. It says that his soul was a reincarnation of Yirmiyahu Hanavi. Yirmiyahu Hanavi, he was the prophet that actually witnessed the Beis Hamikdash being destroyed. He witnessed men, women, and children being dragged away in chains and being tortured and beaten and humiliated and killed. And he saw all this. So you can imagine the pain that he felt. So this person, his neshama was a Gilgul, meaning reincarnation of Yirmiyahu Hanavi. So he felt the pain of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash more than anyone else. However, when he came to Miron, came to Baomer, he did the same thing like he always does. He said this prayer. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said that on this day, it's a day that you're supposed to be besimcha, supposed to be happy. And because he said this prayer, which is the opposite, it makes it more of a sad day, a day of mourning, that's unfortunately why whatever happened, happened. Because he wasn't supposed to go into a place of mourning and sadness on such a day. So just to explain a little bit, what does it mean? And how could it make sense to be happy on such a day? After all, it's the passing of a tzaddik. And the more you understand the greatness of a tzaddik, the more you understand that it should be something which should be very painful that we miss such a great tzaddik. So the answer is, let's take something which is similar. When Moshiach comes, what are we going to do with all these days that now they're days of mourning? Like Tisha B'Av, we fast the whole day. The 3 weeks up to Tisha B'Av, we don't make weddings, we don't take haircuts, we don't buy new clothes. 9 days before Tisha B'Av, we stop drinking wine, we stop eating meat. We do things to show that we're mourning over the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Then there's other days in the year that we fast. On the 17th of Tammuz we fast. On the 10th of Teves we fast. On the 3rd day of Tishrei we fast. All these fast days are connected to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. There are days that historic events happened that led or were part of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So what's going to happen with these days when Moshiach comes? I would think that when Moshiach comes, these days will no longer be days on the calendar. There's no more fasting, no more crying, no more mourning. Mashiach is here. Thank God it's over and it's finished. The Rambam writes, no, and based on a pasuk, a verse in the Tanakh, it says that these days will actually be transformed into Yom Tovim, into holidays. How does that make sense? How can a day like Tisha B'Av be a day to celebrate when this is a day that such tragedies happen? So the answer is, when Mashiach comes, not only will it be a good time, a time of bliss, physically, spiritually, but then we'll see that all the things that happened to us in these years of Golus, how in essence, it was really a bracha in a hidden way. We know this rule, this principle, that anything that happens to a person is from Hashem, and therefore, in essence, it's really a blessing. The only difference is sometimes the blessing you see it openly, and sometimes the blessing is there in disguise. Sometimes you openly see that this is a positive thing and you're excited, and sometimes something happens which is painful, and it looks like it's the opposite of a blessing, but in truth, it's also a blessing, but this blessing is hidden. And the truth is, most of the times we don't see it, but sometimes we do see it. Or you hear stories of people that it happened to them, and at least that should help us realize that even when we don't see it, that's really what's going on. So if a person loses money and they're upset, of course, it takes strong faith to say this to myself, but I have to say to myself, everything is from Hashem. So obviously he wanted me to lose the money that I lost, but I believe that this is really a hidden bracha. And I just don't see it. Because if it's from Hashem, it's surely for the good. So this is a hidden blessing. However, the hidden blessing will always be something in proportion to the negative thing that happened. Which means if a person lost $20, then the hidden blessing is a blessing, but it's also something along those lines, something of that value, whatever it is. If a person lost something much more than $20, let's say he lost all his possession, God forbid, which is huge, so it must be that the bracha that's hidden is also huge. If a person, something happened to them which is much deeper than that, something emotional, which is very painful, very deep, and really shook me up. So it must be that's also a bracha, but that's even a bigger bracha, because the opposite is so huge. So the bracha is huge. So now let's think for a moment about Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the day that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. This is the day that sort of led hundreds of thousands and millions of Jews into exile, with all the suffering that went on. And not only that, Tisha B'Av is really the beginning, is the opening of the whole era of Golus, of exile, which means all the negative things that happened from then till now, it's all the result of that day. So we can't say that the tragedy of that day is huge. It's huge, infinite huge, because this is a day that brought so much pain and suffering for thousands of years. But then it must also mean that the hidden bracha in this day is something which is, in comparison, huge. And the hidden bracha that day is the blessing that's going to be when Mashiach comes, which will be eternal, which will be infinite. So therefore, when Mashiach comes and we'll see the hidden blessing in that day, it'll be a yontif, because we're going to see such blessing that's beyond our comprehension now. But then we'll see the blessing that it's so much, such a great, amazing thing that we'll be rejoicing even more than we rejoice on Pesach and Shavuos and Sukkot and every day, because this is a day that contains in it a blessing which is in proportion to all the pain and all the suffering. You follow this, or I confuse you? Got it? Okay. So therefore, let's think of this. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai passed away, and generally speaking, in Jewish law and custom, it's actually not a day to be happy. In fact, the halacha is, even today, that if someone is commemorating a yahrzeit of a parent, yahrzeit means the anniversary of their passing, on that day, they shouldn't even attend the wedding. So some people fast on that day. Most people don't do it today, but it used to be accustomed to fast. They learn certain parts of Torah. They say Kaddish. It's more of a solemn day. So he came along and said that on that day, they should actually be singing and dancing like a wedding. How does that make sense? So the answer is, because he was the one who revealed the hidden secrets of Torah in the world. In other words, he took these secrets and these teachings, which will be revealed only when Mashiach comes, he already began to reveal them during his lifetime. And therefore, in a certain way, he was already in that future era. That's where he was mentally and emotionally. And to him, just like then, such a day will be transformed into a day of rejoicing. Therefore, now it also is already a day of rejoicing. You follow that? Okay. So therefore, this person who unfortunately wasn't happy on that day, he was focusing on the destruction of the temple. In a sense, what he did was he didn't allow Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai wants to lift us on this day and sort of lift us into the era of the future. And if we live with Mashiach, I'm sure you've heard this before, that alone hastens Mashiach's coming. Not just to learn about it, but to live with it. Live with it means that we feel so strongly the imminence of Mashiach's coming that we're already living with that excitement. It's like when you know that something is surely about to happen, which is very exciting, you're already excited before it even happened. So that's how we should feel about Mashiach. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai wanted to lift us into that era, and that's by being the simcha. So therefore, this person was doing something wrong by doing the opposite of simcha. So the bottom line is that when Lag Baomer comes, it's a day of Simcha. That's why there's no classes. The custom in many places is that children go out into the field, like I said before, and they don't have school. And it's interesting because it says that the Torah study of little children especially is very precious to Hashem. When we say little children, it means any child that's under the age of bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah. It's so precious to Hashem even when Moshiach comes and they're going to build the Beis Hamikdash, and everybody's going to be running and wanting to have some part in building the Beis Hamikdash, there'll be one group of people that wouldn't be allowed to participate. Who's that? Those who teach little children Torah. Because Hashem doesn't want that you should disturb their Torah study, even for the building of Beis Hamikdash, because their Torah study is very precious. Yet on this day, we do cancel classes for little children and also the adults, and we cancel the classes in order to sort of commemorate this day in a festive way. Okay, so this is one part of it. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask your questions. Okay, I want to touch on another thing briefly, not enough time, just briefly. And that is that if Chas v'Shalom there's no rain, a drought, it's dangerous. No rain means no food. No food means people can't live. So in halacha, there's a whole regimen of what we need to do if there's no rain. First we do one thing, if it still doesn't help, we do another thing. That doesn't help, we do another thing. A lot of them is days of fasting. If at one point it still didn't help, we're supposed to go out into the streets with the Torah scroll and read the Torah in the streets where the rain is supposed to come down into the fields. So it's a whole big to do. In fact, there was one rabbi, they called him Cheni Hamagel, which means Cheni, the circle maker. What does that mean? He was a very big tzaddik, and he was especially known that he would pray to Hashem for rain. If he prayed for rain, then it would happen. So there's a story in Gemara, and why do they call him the circle maker? The story in Gemara that they came to him to pray for rain. He went out into the field, took a stick, and made a circle on the floor around him. And he said, Hashem, we need rain. Your children need rain. And until you bring rain, I'm not going to step out of this circle. I'm going to stay here. I'm sure if I would say it, Hashem would say, okay, stay there. But he was someone who was very precious to Hashem, very dear to Hashem. So it started to rain. And the Gemara says it rained so strong, they came running and said, it's too strong, it's going to destroy the fields. So he prayed again and said, Hashem, it's too strong. Could you please make it come down soft and gentle? It changed and the rain started to come down very gentle. So they came back to him and said, it's coming down with so gentle, there's no force to it, it's not going to make anything grow. So he prayed a third time and said, Hashem, it's too gentle now, please make it adjusted a little bit. And finally it rained the exact measure that it was supposed to rain. Then there's the story with Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, that people came to him and they said, there's no rain, there's a drought. What did he do? He did something else, very different. Again, the standard approach, what to do when it's no rain, is prayer, tefillah. He did something different. He said words of Torah, and he explained a certain concept of Kabbalah based on the pasuk, Hine matov u'manoyim shevet achim gam yachad, which means how beautiful it is when brothers sit together. That's the literal meaning. But in this verse, there's a lot of hidden secrets. And after he finished giving that Dvar Torah, those words of Torah, it started to rain. Which means what he did was as follows. Everything that happens here comes from up there, comes from heaven. First it happens in heaven in some sort of a spiritual way, and then from heaven it evolves down here on earth in a physical way. It manifests in a physical way. So therefore, if it rains, it's also the same thing. If there's a rain, if there's a storm, if the sun is shining, if there's a earthquake, if there's a volcano, something is happening in the spiritual realm, which is spiritual. And when that evolves down here, it could manifest in a rain, in a storm, in a snow, in hail, in a volcano, in an earthquake, whatever it is that's meant to happen. What he did was, he said the words of Torah, and through these words of Torah and Kabbalah, he explained that he studied what happens spiritually, which is the source of rain in the spiritual realm. And sort of once he created it in the source, from there it manifested and came down here. So it was a different approach. The approach of prayer is me, we're down here, we're turning to Hashem, and we're asking, could you bring us rain? He did something different. He changed things up there, and as a result, down here, there was rain. You know, it reminds me of a story. There's a very big tzaddik, his name was Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev. And every year, at the beginning of the winter, he'd have a meeting with all his supporters, and they needed money for heat. In those days, heat meant firewood. And you need a lot of firewood to put into the fireplace so that the shul would have heat. So the way it worked, that they would say, who's ready to donate firewood? And one person said, I'll donate firewood for 1 week. I'll donate firewood for 2 weeks. I'll donate firewood for 3 days. You put it all together until you have enough firewood for the whole year. So when it came home, the Rebbe said, asked him, so how did the meeting go? He said, Baruch Hashem, successful. Then she said, and this one donated this one donated that. Then she said in a joking way, and how much firewood did you donate? So he said, I promised 2 weeks of warm weather. In other words, because he was who he was, he said, I'm not going to donate firewood. I'm going to donate, and that through whatever I can do, that for 2 weeks we'll have such warm weather, you won't need firewood. In a similar way, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, he changed things in the heavenly realm. And when things change up there through the Torah that he taught, so if you're going to look at a lot of advertisements or whatever you're going to see out there, on like Baomer, you'll see in a lot of places next to the advertisement, they might have the words, Hine matov manoim sheva sachem gam yachad. Also, the Rebbes of Chabad, when they would say words of Torah on this day, most of it began with the words, Hine matov manoim sheva sachem gam yachad. And the reason is because this, in a sense, personifies who he was and what he was, that he was able to do things in a way different than other tzaddikim. He was able to access and reach out into the heavenly realm, change things there through Torah, and from there it evolved down here. Okay, so this is a big day coming up, and we should not only rejoice, but march out of Gullus. Those used to be parades where you march. You want to march out of Gullus. Anyway, on the table here you have these different booklets. This is from the memoirs. If you want to read about the other people who were called Baal Shem, you can read that. So Rabbi Akiva, you can read about Shimon Bar Yochai, and increase your knowledge on the subject. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Rachel, could you give this to Madrichot when you get to no. Yeah.